What do you see when you look in the mirror? Do you see a project that needs a lot of work? Do you see a failure? Do you see a guy who's barely surviving and just kind of holding on, if you know what I mean? Or maybe it's a guy who's better than everyone else. Or maybe you look at it and see a guy who's got a secret life he doesn't want people to know about. Maybe a guy who lives his life somewhere else, like a virtual world, and isn't really around much in the real world. Or maybe you just see the greatest guy in the world. You think he's the best, no one compares to him. It's funny that guys can see all of those in the same day. There are many more things you could see, many more attitudes you could have. The issue is a mirror really does make a difference in our life. What we see is what is there. We see a reflection. And that's important because it's good for us to reflect, to think about our life, to think about what's going on. And how we view ourselves as men changes everything about us and how we live. How you view yourself will oftentimes set the tone of how you live your life. If you see yourself as a loser, you'll act like a loser. If you see yourself as the greatest, sometimes you'll do great things. You may have a huge ego, but it's just the way it is. Now, some men, they avoid the mirror. They don't reflect at all. But as men, we've got to have courage to look and really see what's happening. And we do that by looking at the mirror of our life. Now, to help illustrate this, we're talking about one of my favorite musical numbers from one of the Muppet movies. So let's jump in.
Welcome to the Confident Man Podcast, empowering men with the confidence they need to live their adventure. Now, here is your host, David Maxwell.
Hey guys, welcome to the Confident Man Podcast. I'm so glad you joined me here today, and I'm so glad that you want to be a better man. Keep working, keep doing it. It's going to be worth it. Now, when I was growing up, I was a fan of the Muppets. I really was. I used to watch the Muppets every week. They'd have a new special guest, and it was fun to watch. And as a family, we loved two Muppet movies especially. Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island. Those are probably my two families' favorite movies. You know, Tim Curry, Michael Caine, they deserved Oscars for their performance. They really did. My favorite Tim Curry line was when he's about to sing his song and he goes, "Back up, boys, it's my only number." And I love the way they break the fourth wall there. It makes me laugh every time. And then Michael Caine, who was practically he really was. He was crying. He was tearful. He was fearful in front of a puppet. He did all of this acting in front of a puppet. Both of them did a great job. I think they should have Academy Awards, honestly, for their performances. Now, some of the other movies the Muppets made weren't the greatest. Those are my two favorites. But then in 2011, they came out with one that I think kind of brought back some of the old charm of the Muppet movie. Jason Segal and Amy Adams were in it. It was the classic movie. And there was a song in it that actually won an Oscar. I didn't know that till I was getting ready for this. And it's a song called Man or Muppet. And it's got this key line, "Am I a man or am I a Muppet?" And it's such a funny line. And I wanted to use it for this show for a couple reasons. One, it just makes me laugh. I laugh at it. You may not. I don't care. But if you watch the movie and you like the movie, you'll get it. It's a great line. And it makes me want to watch it again. I probably will in the next week. But it also illustrates a good point for us as men. I think it's a good way to illustrate really what's going on. If we never ask ourselves important questions, we'll never figure out where we are in life as men. Now, men, we've got to be willing to reflect. We've got to be willing to look in the mirror and see what's going on in our life. As men, we have a tendency to just put our head down and grind, just to get through the week, get through the day. And that is good. That's part of what makes us men. It's good for us to get things done, but sometimes it's good for us to look up from the grind, to see, okay, where am I at? What's going on? And so what I want to do is use the man or Muppet illustration to help you think of some ways to kind of look up, to kind of reflect. And we're going to do it over the next two shows because being a man or Muppet actually fits where a lot of us are living. So this week, we're going to talk about what it means to be a Muppet, okay? And are you living as a Muppet or are you living as a real man? Now, when I say a Muppet, I don't mean that you literally turn into Kermit the Frog. Although I wonder, who would you want to be if you were a Muppet? I had a hard time figuring it out. I haven't yet. I love the Swedish Chef. I love Rizzo. I love his snide remarks. Of course, Kermit is the boss. It's just hard to think through who you would like. But what you have to understand is the Muppets, they're pretend. They really are. They seem real. We know them, but they're not real. And I think a lot of men, their life, they've been living as a Muppet. It's not a genuine life. They're living it, they're doing things, but they're not really men. They're Muppets. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, a Muppet is a caricature, a Muppet is controlled, and a Muppet is comic relief. First thing we want to talk about is the caricature. Now, the interesting thing about the Muppets is when in the show, they would have a special guest, and a lot of times they would make a Muppet that looked just like them. The old TV show did it, and they did it in the movie. Jason Segal's character was singing the song, am I a man or am I a Muppet? And then there was a Muppet that looked a lot like Jason Segel singing that song. And so you're kind of like, oh, that's really wild. When you look at it, it helps you understand Muppets a lot of times are caricatures of real people. They're not real. And a lot of men will often allow themselves to kind of move into that caricature role. They won't be authentic to who they are as men. They'll be kind of a caricature. And that happens for a lot of reasons. One, they have the caricature of peer pressure. We think of peer pressure as being like a middle school thing or a high school thing. Oh, they gave in to peer pressure and all that. Peer pressure happens in all ages. It really does. My favorite example of peer pressure, I was reading an article one time about the Villages. It's a huge retirement place in Florida. And in the Villages, most everybody drives around on golf carts. They have golf cart trails. That's how everybody drives around. They don't do cars, they do golf carts. But people started stepping up their golf carts. And so more and more people so there's almost like this pressure to have this luxury golf cart for a lot of people. Why? It's peer pressure. These people are retired. These people are on the backside of life. They're having fun and doing all that. Good, I'm glad. But they feel this pressure, this peer pressure to step up with their golf cart. So peer pressure is something all men have. Now, men are competitive. We just are. It's how we are. And sometimes that competitiveness kind of pushes us to compete when really no one else is competing against us, but we have to compete. We have to win. So we sometimes have a built-in peer pressure. No one else is putting it on us, but we feel it ourselves. But then men also do it to be accepted by a group, to be accepted by other people. And so what men who feel this pressure, whether it's from the outside or from within, they develop caricatures of themselves. They're not genuine. They essentially become a Muppet because they're not being authentic. They're not being real to who they are. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be part of a group. It doesn't mean that you don't get involved with things and do competitions. You should do that. But it means you remain your authentic self the whole time. If you're being a Muppet, if you're being a caricature, you can't do that. Another caricature is the caricature of acting. A lot of guys could win their own Academy Awards for the way they act. They really do. I was this type of guy for a long time. I really was. I wanted to be accepted. Plus, I had ravaging insecurity in my life. So I kind of changed who I was based on who I was around. So it took me a long time to really develop my own desires, my own mind. I just changed mask all the time, depending on what group I was around. And a lot of people are like that today. A lot of men will do that. They'll just change who they are based on who they're around. And they've played parts so long, a lot of men don't really know who they are. They play a part around everybody. Now, we do have important roles, and sometimes a role can feel like a mask, but it's not. You should walk in your roles. You should do your role. Like you're a worker, you're a husband, you're a father. Whatever your roles are, you need to give your best to those. But those roles don't define who you are as a man. You as a man bring yourself to those roles. And we want to be careful that we don't become actors acting the roles out. Another caricature is self-rejection. A lot of guys fall in this. Some men have just decided that their life's just not exciting, or they don't like themselves. So they kind of become a caricature. They choose a character of something else because they don't want to be who they are. A lot of the guys, their motivation for this is they just think they're not enough by themselves. that if people knew the real them, they wouldn't accept them. So they have to pretend. They have to kind of fake it in front of people. Now, sometimes we do have to just kind of act. If we're going through a tough time and we're getting through it, that's who we are as men. But a lot of men use that to hide. They just run away. And these guys do it because they're rejecting who they are. They don't like themselves. So these guys will either start acting, being someone else, or they'll just live in insecurity. And their self-loathing will drive them into addictions, virtual addiction, porn, gaming, all those things. And men will play these parts because to them, it's more exciting than who they think they really are. And it can even take a dark turn for men. They can start acting out who they're not. Like I saw a show the other day that talked about furries. And these are men who will wear animal costumes out in public, and they want people to treat them as the animal. That's who they think they are. It's very extreme, very strange, but these guys are rejecting life, and they were rejecting who they really are. That's the point. They preferred the part to real life. That's the ultimate self-rejection. And the reason so many men aren't stepping up in their roles as leaders is because they're not being real. And a lot of men, it's because they're rejecting themselves. There are Muppets out there. It's men who are pretending. They're being caricatures of themselves. For whatever reason, we just named off 3 quick reasons. But as men, we've got to focus on growing authentically, being our true selves and not being a caricature of a man. The second thing we want to talk about when it comes to being a Muppet or a man, we're going from the Muppet side right now, is the controlled. If you've ever seen one of the behind the scenes videos of how they make Muppet movies, it's pretty amazing. Puppeteers are actually behind the scenes below camera shot, and they're the ones controlling the Muppets or the puppets. And the actors are above the camera shot interacting with what is essentially someone's hand or someone moving something. So it's an amazing thing when you think of the actor's ability to give a great performance to what is essentially a hand puppet. That's what they're doing. The reality is the puppets aren't real. They're being controlled. Now, Muppets, they're controlled. And I think that's something that men have to think about today. How many men today are being controlled? How many men have their own mind? How many men are living their lives controlled by others? And I think that's a reality we have to look at as men. Now, I'm not talking about men who are being slaves and they're controlled in that way, although some men may like that. Those guys need help. I'm talking about men who allow society or people or their own insecurities to control them. They really do. It's like a hand in their back telling them what to say and how to think. Let's look at someone. Let's look at society. If society is controlling a man, understand that's something society has always wanted to do. Society has always wanted to control men, to tell men how to think, how to act, what to do. Now, sometimes that necessarily hasn't been bad. Sometimes it pushes men to be better. But today, a lot of guys are only offered the extremes of manhood. You're either the tough guy with bazillion abs and, you can kill everybody, you can sleep with all the women and all this stuff, or you're the crying poet in the rain who's really, really, really in touch with his feelings, or you're the goofball guy, the guy who all you think about is food and sex, or you're the tech nerd who lives in the basement and lives off ramen. That's a new one that's kind of coming out over the last few years. And so we've got to understand that some of those actually have a touch of truth in them. They really do. But what society does is it tells you that's who you are. And men who accept that are men who are actually accepting being controlled. They really are. They don't develop and grow as individuals. They grow based upon what society tells them they should be. And society forms this collective. This is what men are. And a lot of men give into that. And a lot of men think that way. Well, a man should do this. A man has to chop his own wood. He's got to build his own house. He's got to do this. Not all men got to do that. Every man's an individual, but we kind of treat it like it's the Borg. In Star Trek, the Borg said resistance is futile. They absorbed everybody and everything around them. And what we have to understand is, as men, we can't let society do that to us. We have to remain the individuals we are. Now, sometimes society will push us and make us angry, make us upset, and we'll want to lash out. But again, we got to be careful, or we will become what they say we are. Every man's an angry man. Every man can't control his temper. And they're the ones driving us to do it. And as soon as we mess up, they point their fingers at us. So we've got to be careful as men and make sure that we aren't controlled. Now, who controls us? Oh, there's a few different groups out there, a lot of people, society as a whole, but people will also control us. People like to control because people like to feel powerful. You've probably been around people. They love to tell stories about how good they are, how smart they are. Everybody's like that. We all like to feel powerful. We just do. And now controlling someone is a very powerful thing. It's a drug. And some people love to be able to control another person. They don't necessarily have good motives. Now, some people may say, I'm trying to motivate, and that's okay, I guess, to a point, but we've got to be careful that that control doesn't become something we need or that we allow others to do to us. Now, I'll hit this real quick. Some men are controlling, and I'm not here to talk about that. That'll be another podcast later down the line. But we've got to be careful as men that we're not the ones addicted to the drug of controlling people, telling them how to live their lives, telling them what to do, telling them how to think. It's just not good. We don't want to be controllers. Men who control are usually men who want to make themselves feel important. But the main thing we're dealing with is men who are controlled, men who allow others to control them. Now, a lot of times, men will get into relationships with women with control in mind. Now you say, what are you talking about? Well, there's two types, okay? There's the man who likes being controlled by a woman. And there are men out there like that. They want the woman to tell them what to wear, what to think, what to do. They essentially want a mom, which is kind of sick when you think about it. But some guys, they want to be controlled. They want the mom to do everything because they want stuff easy. And that's really why they do it. They want a level of comfort where they don't have to think, they don't have to do a lot, that, she'll take care of everything. So they don't do anything. So there's an ease to it that they like. So some guys, they like that. I don't think it helps you grow and develop as a man, but some guys are like that. Other guys, it's funny. They think, I don't ever want to be controlled by a woman, okay? And so they're very almost macho, all that. And they say, no woman's controlling me. But the funny thing is some of those men are not emotionally very intelligent, okay? So women who are smart can get in and control them by making them think they're still in control. And we've all seen guys like that who ain't no woman controlling me, but they are. The woman's telling them what to do, how to do it. She just does it in a sweet way. He doesn't understand what's going on. So we've got to be careful, guys, that we're not being controlled. One, because we want to be, because we're lazy. And the other is because we just think, oh, I'll never be controlled, when we really are. We need to look into that and make sure no one's got their hand in our back telling us what to do and how to live. I'm not saying you be contrary and argue with people. I'm just saying you want to make sure you are your own man. Okay, the other one is when we get controlled by the lie. Okay, some men say I'm not being controlled by a person, but a lot of times those men are being controlled by the lies of people, by lies that people have put out there. There's the lie that money's going to bring you happiness. The guy who dies with the most toys wins. That's a lie, but a lot of guys live that way. And it's really affected men throughout history. They've wanted more money, and all these things. Now, if you want a show about money and how you should look at money, episode 148 that just came out is A Man's View of Money. It'll give you a lot of good tips on how you should look at money as a man. But a lot of men think money will bring them happiness. That's a lie, and they're being controlled by that lie. Other men, they believe the lie that their work is their identity. My success is who I am as a man. All these things, they're lies. But a lot of guys believe them. They work toward success. They work toward bonuses. They work toward awards. And they're actually being controlled by that lie. They're not being their own man. Nothing wrong with awards, success, all that's great. But you want to do it, and you don't want to do it because you're responding to a lie. And that's what a lot of men do. The other lie that controls a lot of guys is toughness and being emotionally distant, not feeling, not caring, being strong. A lot of guys have bought that tough guy image, and it's made them alone because tough guys a lot of times are all by themselves. So guys want to be the tough guy, yet they want a relationship, but they don't really give themselves to the relationship because they believe the lie. They're being controlled. The emotionally distant man will blunt his feelings, and he will have a hard time connecting with other people. So here's what we have to understand. Men can be controlled, either from within or from without. And so what we have to do is make sure that we're not being a Muppet. We don't have someone's hand in our back, whether through a lie, whether a person, or whether we're just lazy and we let someone else control us. We don't want to be that because that means we're not being a man, but we're being a Muppet. All right, the third thing we want to talk about when it comes to being a man or a Muppet is comic relief. Okay, what makes the Muppets so popular? They're funny. They just are. They're funny in a lot of ways. The dry humor, the breaking of the fourth wall, those things are hilarious. And that's what makes the Muppets funny. They do stuff like that. Like the character of Rizzo in the Muppet Christmas Carol. He's really snarky. He's snide. He says funny things. He talks to the audience. He's one of my favorite characters in that movie because of the way he's so funny. And that's what we want to understand. The Muppets are funny, but for us as men, we want to make sure that we don't fall into that role of being just the funny person, being the comic relief. It's like getting friend zoned in life. The plucky comic relief is great in a movie, but not in real life. You don't want to be that guy. In real life, you want to be a well-rounded man. Can you be funny? Yes. Should you be funny? Sure. The greatness of dads is their dad jokes. And they're great. They're hilarious. However, we've got to be more. We should develop all sides of who we are as men. We don't want to get relegated to being just the funny guy. Now, you may have a funny personality, and that's great. You should. But have you ever been around one of those people who just can't stop being funny? They can't take anything seriously. And a lot of times they're hiding behind their humor. It's the mask they have on. I think of one of the greatest comedians of all time, Robin Williams. The guy was incredibly funny. He could be funny with anything, anytime, anywhere, but he was hiding a lot behind his life, and he ended up taking his own life. Now, he was known as the funny guy, but there was a serious side that I think a lot of people didn't see. Now, sometimes he acted in a serious role and was very good at it, but the thing is about him is he was seen as just the funny guy. So I wonder how often he tried to be funny as a way to hide. And I think about us as men. How many of us do that? We hide behind humor. We want to be seen as funny, and that's fine. But we also want to be seen as men who are capable of serious discussion, serious thought, men who can take care of their business when they need to. You don't want to just be the comic relief. We don't look at the Muppets as serious characters. Like if we're going to watch a Shakespearean play done by the Muppets, we don't expect it to be serious. We expect it to be funny. That's what the Muppets are. We want to make sure that as men, that's not how people see us, as just the funny guy, as just a guy who doesn't take anything seriously. We don't want to be put into a box of just the funny person. People will like you, and that's nice, but they won't take you seriously. They just won't. Leaders can be funny, but not all the time. Husbands can be funny, but not all the time. Dads can be funny, but not all the time. You don't want to be just a guy who's known as being funny. You don't want to be the guy who can't take anything seriously. And I've been around those people, and what they do is they blame others. Oh, they're just too uptight. I was only kidding. Don't be so serious. However, the problem is not with them. The problem is with us if we can never be serious, if we're only a funny person. And too many men have adopted this role of comic relief in life, and they get typecast in it, and so they don't think of anything else. They don't try to be anything else. And eventually this gets old. And have you ever seen a guy who was known as the funny guy, but then as he gets older, he's still funny, but he kind of gets that edge to him. He gets really cynical. That's a guy who's never been taken seriously, and he starts to get a big chip on his shoulder. So he gets really cynical with his humor, and he puts everything and everybody down. That's a guy who was never seen as someone serious, and he got tired of it, and he got mad at it. So here's the deal. Muppets are fun because they're funny. We like that. Men can be fun, but we also want to be known as men who can be serious, men who have clear thoughts, a man who can express himself, a man who can have an opinion, a man who can care and listen to people. We don't want to let ourselves get put into the comic relief box. We want people to take us seriously as men and not just comic relief like Muppets. So I'm going to close out the show and ask you the all-important question. Are you a man or are you a Muppet? I won't sing the song for you. You can go to YouTube and watch the song. It's hilarious, but it would be better if I don't sing because you'll run screaming away from wherever you're listening to us or if you're watching this on YouTube. But the question remains, are you a man or are you a Muppet? Are you being like a Muppet in the way you live? And, the questions to ask yourself, am I being a caricature? A Muppet is a caricature. So you want to ask, am I being a caricature? Am I being just characters that other people tell me I should be? Or are you being controlled? Muppets are controlled by someone else. You've got to ask yourself, am I being controlled? Is someone else telling me how to think and how to live, or do I have my own mind? And if you don't, what are you doing to grow your mind so you can develop your own way of thinking? What's your worldview? What's it based on? If you don't know, you're probably being controlled by someone or something else. And then the third one is comic relief. If you want to be taken seriously, you've got to be able to live in other emotions besides humor. You don't want to just be the funny guy all the time. They won't take you seriously as a man. So I want to challenge you this week to review your life. Are there more Muppet-like tendencies in you? Do you tend to kind of flow in that Muppet zone? Well, if you do, you want to think about that and begin to think about how to change. Next week, we're going to talk about what you need to do to be a man.
You've been listening to the Confident Man Podcast. Click subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can connect with David on Facebook and Instagram at David the Maxwell. Find resources to help you as a man at theconfidentman.me. That's theconfidentman.me.